have it.
I have a copy for the court.
So, Your Honor, we are adding this to...
We're on the record now. Okay, we're back on the record. People versus Durst. He's here with Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. DeGuerin, and we have Mr. Lewin and Mr. Henderson at council table about a new stipulation.
Correct. Your Honor, we are adding that the people agree that they are also not going to call Mr. Smerling during the trial.
Can I put this on, Dave? I think I can summarize it
Sure.
pretty quickly. So we have a stipulation, Your Honor, that we have agreed to. It's taken a substantial amount of work. This stipulation is in lieu of Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling or anybody else from Hit the Ground Running testifying in this case. I have told Mr. Chesnoff that he has made an offer of proof. An issue that he was concerned with was that if Mr. Durst testifies that there were times when Mr. Jarecki, during the making of the Jinx, asked Bob to repeat himself, change, reshoot this part, etc. Did that happen, and would I be calling Mr. Jarecki to impeach that? I will not, because it's my understanding that in fact there were times during the making of the Jinx when that's what occurred. So the additional part of the stipulation would simply be that it applies to Mark Smerling, and that absent Mr. Durst testifying to something which is different than that offer of proof which Mr. Chesnoff made to me, we would not anticipate that either Mr. Jarecki or Mr. Smerling would be coming back. As I said to Mr. Chesnoff, because I don't know what Mr. Durst is going to testify to, let's assume he got up on the stand and said that, they told me X, Y, Z, and it's something completely foreign. I wouldn't have a choice. But the court is going to be able to understand. We would certainly leave it up to the court after hearing from both counsel if such an issue arises.
So you will agree not to call Smerling or Jarecki?
Absent Mr.
Jarecki, that you will not call them except in rebuttal.
Correct, and even in rebuttal.
And then, if and only if Mr. Durst were to make some statement inconsistent with what he had said to Jarecki and Smerling.
Right. It's even more than that. It would have to be not just something inconsistent, but a statement that was material enough. And I think we would come to the court where I would say to the court, Your Honor, we were not provided any information on this. Mr. Durst has said X, Y, Z. Here's where we're in. I'm trying to basically just protect Mr. Chesnoff's request that in essence, I'm not saving Mr. Jarecki to come back on rebuttal and impeach Bob on everything that he says.
All right, anything else?
The only thing I would add, Your Honor, is that we spent time speaking to our client. He approves of this stipulation as well.
Right, so agreed?
Yes, the last part of it, Your Honor, is that as the court's aware, there is going to be, the way that the stipulation is done, there are exhibits that will come with it. We're going to turn in the exhibits to the court when we put them together. So does that make sense? Normally we always give the court the exhibits. This is happening very quickly, so that's why it's not prepared.
There are blank spaces where the exhibits will be filled in later. That's obviously not material to the agreement. I've read the stipulation. It's carefully crafted. There's something for each side. It makes sense to me. I accept the stipulation. And you accept the last part that Mr. Wood just added?
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. And then finally, just for the court, our plan is this afternoon, we're going to end up playing after Investigator Becerra, we're going to end up playing the movie All Good Things this afternoon.
So shall I advise a jury to have a light lunch so that they don't doze off during the film?
Will the court object if Mr. Bailey and I provide popcorn, Your Honor?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can't serve food, but...
And I know we delayed the jury with this break, but I think they won on this one.
It's worthwhile.
Yes.
Thank you.
How long is the
I'm sorry?
90 minutes, I think. 90-minute movie?
What did we just say?
It's about 100 minutes.
An hour and 1 hour 43.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
All right, we can get our jurors. How many days? Durst, present with Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin. Mr. Henderson and Mr. Alien are present for the people. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for that delay. You'll be pleased to know that these wonderful lawyers have just reached an agreement as to certain witnesses that will save us at least 4 days. So this is just a terrific work on their part. So I'm thrilled with them. So thank you for your good work.
You won't yell at me during my crush.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So
Lot of
with
time.
that praise, Mr. Henderson, what do you wish to present next?
Yes, Your Honor. In that same spirit, we have a stipulation. So I'd like to mark as People's 241. This was originally Stipulation 43. During the pendency of this trial,
Right? 241? Yeah.
During the pendency of this trial, the parties may play, or have played, audio recordings of telephone calls defendant Robert Durst made from jail or prison while incarcerated in Pennsylvania in 2001 and 2002, Louisiana in 2015, 2016, Indiana in 2016, and Los Angeles from 2016 to the present. The parties stipulate to the authenticity of these audio recordings. The parties further stipulate to the dates and times for each call as described with each call. So stipulated?
Stipulated.
The court accepts that stipulation.
Before you play, can I have one moment?
Of course.
In the jail calls from Indiana, we don't want to create a false impression there was some other crime in Indiana. This is part of the transportation towards Los Angeles as part of his arrest.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Those of the jurors who are familiar with geography know that Indiana's not on direct line from Louisiana to California, but that's the way the federal government works.
So he
And
was
we got a lot of nods for
right.
that.
Just yeah. Okay. To Indiana on his way here. Is that it? Something like that.
Right.
Okay.
In the continued interest of brevity, I'm just going to mark 3 DVDs. This is People's 242, 243, 244. Collectively, it's going to be less than 10 minutes. 242 is a December 14th jail call from 2001, Pennsylvania. And 243 and 244 are excerpts from the same call, December 21st, 2001. Playing People's 242.
And you know what I told you the other day about when we were talking, what I said what you were going to do? Remember? No. We were talking, you were telling me about what your life has been like and what you were thinking.
Yeah, my plan, yeah.
Okay?
You're definitely not going to say.
Okay, but you told me what your plans were, well, and I told you that I knew, I had a feeling, I suspected. Remember?
And I certainly screwed it up, didn't I?
Well, never mind that, but if I suspected, he too suspected. That's what I'm trying to say. Didn't really talk about it.
Something I think I left this out, but I'll tell you that I went to his owner house while I was there.
I think I read that you did, but I don't remember what you told me.
You read somebody, I think I told you, the Mike Kennedy type, I was driving around these places, I grew up, my family places.
Oh, it was in the newspaper then.
Yeah, but I really went. And the next time we have a visiting day, I'll go over it with you.
I'd like to get it.
I could have left that out.
Okay, but I just want you to know that, remember what I told you I thought you were going to do? He knew it too. Keep that in mind.
I think that if he was concerned about that, he wouldn't have been treating me so bad.
I disagree.
What?
I don't agree with you. Treating you
If he thought I would screw it up like I did, maybe he's right. I guess he is right then. If he knew it right,
Remember that if I knew it, he knew it. That's my point.
Playing next from a week later, People's 243.
from way back when, I was planning on Igoring DM.
Yes, I know.
So that was a big problem getting married. because I was afraid that what happened to me just now, you know, would happen back then.
Can I ask you how you brought that up? Don't you think to me, Bill, how you felt?
I don't think he knew what I was, you know, Igor.
Yeah, I think you did because I knew. So I think.
Oh, no, he don't know me like that. Maybe now he suspects that maybe or something. I don't know. This is just so. I suspect he doesn't even suspect now.
And from that same call, People's 244.
You know, for me to explain or let the jury know what a terrible life I've had, the way to do it is to get BM to testify.
Not the best.
What?
It's like an incredible mistake.
I can't. I could get BM and I could get the other people who watch him being, you know, who during those days and have them all testify.
Your Honor, people would now call Detective or Investigator Joseph Becerra.
So remain standing and raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Thank you.
For the record, please state and spell your first and last name.
First name is Joseph, common spelling. Last name is Becerra, B as in boy, E-C-E-R-R-A.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. I guess it's still morning. Where do you live?
New York.
And what is your occupation?
I'm an investigator with the New York State Police, Bureau of Criminal Investigations.
All right. And can you just briefly describe for the jury, those of us who aren't familiar with New York area, is there a difference between the New York State Police and, say, the New York Police Department?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Explain it for us.
New York City Police is responsible for the 5 boroughs in New York.
I'm not sure, maybe it's just me, but I'm not hearing him very well at all.
I'll have you talk over the mic.
Into the mic?
I'll have you speak right into that microphone. These masks muffle us a bit.
Okay.
You'll talk right into it, they'll hear you clearly.
Okay, Your Honor.
You may continue, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you. If you could please just describe the difference for the jury.
New York City Police are responsible for the 5 boroughs in New York, and then there's local police throughout the state, and then the state police have jurisdiction for the whole entire state of New York.
Okay. So Westchester County, what jurisdiction is Westchester County under?
Westchester County has local police departments, but it also has a state police, and we're responsible for the northeastern part of the county, which encompasses 4 towns: Lewisboro, which is South Salem, Pound Ridge, Somers, and North Salem.
Okay. And for how many years have you been employed by the New York State Police?
35 years.
Were you a law enforcement officer prior to joining the New York State Police?
No,
Did you have a job prior to joining the New York State Police?
I was a college student. I went in after college.
Okay. And so what year then, did you start in 1985 approximately?
That is correct.
What was your first assignment when you started?
After I graduated the academy, I was a New York State trooper, and I was assigned to the Fishkill Barracks up in Dutchess County.
Okay. And prior to Fishkill, did you have another assignment?
No, that's where I started.
Okay. And this was as a trooper?
Yes, sir.
What does a trooper do?
Trooper, I guess everyone has the perception that troopers just are on the highways writing tickets, but in New York, we're responsible for all the local law enforcement.
Okay. Do you respond to 911 calls for service?
Yes,
Traffic enforcement?
yes,
Calls for assistance to the police station, for assistance at somebody's house?
yes, and we assist other local police agencies as well.
All right. What did you do after working at Fishkill Barracks?
I spent a small stint working in an undercover assignment, and then from there, I got transferred to the Somers Barracks in Westchester County, where I work now.
What type of undercover assignment?
They put me undercover in a high school for a year.
As a teacher?
Student,
You were an undercover student?
yes.
How old were you at the time?
22?
How? What age? So you were 22 and you were impersonating a what?
Student.
Okay. How long did that last? I couldn't have pulled that off.
Too long. Approximately 4 or 5 months.
Okay. And then you went to Fishkill?
No, then I went to Somers
Then
in Westchester
Somers.
County.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. Describe for the jury where Somers is.
Somers is located in northern Westchester, which is the county just north of New York City. The area I work is mostly a rural area. The towns, they call it like the horse country, a lot of horse farms and that kind of thing. Just basically a suburban and rural setting.
Where is Somers in relation to South Salem?
Next town over.
All right. So do the Somers barracks patrol the area, including South Salem?
Yes.
Got it. And we are using the words barracks. That's not something we're familiar with in California. What's a barrack?
Okay, so like New York City, they call their police stations precincts. Out here, I believe they call them stations. Back in the early days of the state police, they were on horseback, and they used to actually live at the what's called barracks because they actually lived there, and the name just stayed. So we call our stations trooper barracks.
Okay. And are you familiar with the Brewster barracks?
I am.
And where is that in relation to South
It's
Salem?
in Putnam County, but it's only about a 10-minute drive from Somers Barracks.
Okay. And sometimes does the Brewster's barracks cover the area involving South Salem?
If they're short on manpower, they will, but it's a rarity.
Okay. And how about is there a Lewisboro barracks?
We have a substation in South Salem.
All right. And how many people work in that substation?
4 troopers.
And does that also cover the area including South Salem?
Yes, it does.
All right. So would it be unusual for calls to service South Salem area sometimes come into Lewisboro, sometimes come into Somers, sometimes perhaps come into Brewster?
They mainly come into Somers because that's the main station, and then they're basically like farmed out to the other stations, like
Okay.
the South Salem satellite.
Is it out of the ordinary if someone were going to call for service and they're seeking service in South Salem, or they want to report an incident in South Salem, is it out of the ordinary that a member of the public would occasionally call the Brewster's barracks?
Yeah, they could call the Brewster. It depends where they're calling from also.
I want you to assume somebody's calling from, what town? Are you familiar with the witness, Gilberta Najami?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with where she lived back in the 80s?
Newtown, Connecticut, I believe.
Okay. What's the closest barracks to Newtown, Connecticut?
Brewster.
So would it be out of the ordinary for someone who lived in Newtown, Connecticut and was trying to get a hold of the state police to call the Brewster's barrack?
If she called back then, if she called the local operator and she said she wanted the New York State Police, they would connect her to the closest barracks to the Connecticut line, which is the Brewster Barracks.
Okay. So after your stint as a state trooper, what was your next assignment?
I was a trooper for approximately 6.5 years, and then I got promoted to the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, and I got transferred to New York City to the Special Narcotic Prosecutor's Office, where I was assigned to a money laundering detail.
Let me guess, you went undercover at a grade school?
No.
No. I'm joking, obviously, but did you work in an undercover capacity?
Wasn't really undercover per se. We did a lot of surveillance of money launderers.
Okay. And for how many years did you work there?
2 years.
Where did you go after that?
I went up to Somers, back home.
And what did you do when you say back home? Do you live in that general area?
Yes, I do.
Were you familiar with that general area?
Yes.
Did you grow up in that general area?
No, I grew up in White Plains.
Okay. And what were your responsibilities at Somers when you went back?
I did major crimes, the BCI is in charge of all felony investigations, all drug-related cases, and all death cases, and all major cases.
And
And
you-
major cases being any death case, robberies, rapes, burglaries, that sort of thing.
Okay, would homicide get included?
Yes, sir.
And for how many years were you working at Somers?
For several. I couldn't give you the exact amount.
Are you still working there?
I am now.
Did you work there continuously during that whole period of time?
No, there was a period of time where I was transferred to the State Police Barracks in Hawthorne, which is down county.
Well, why so? Or,
Don't know exactly.
okay. You have a suspicion?
Yes.
What's that?
I think something to do with this case.
Okay. We'll talk about that in a second. When, well, who was the district attorney at the time when you got transferred?
Janine Pirro.
And were you working with Janine Pirro on an investigation?
On this investigation, yes.
All right. So in 1999, what was your assignment?
I was assigned to the State Police Barracks in Somers.
And were you assigned as an investigator in the Major Crimes Division?
Well, it's just investigator in the Bureau of Criminal Investigations. Yes, I was.
Covering major crimes.
Anything major that happened in the area, yes.
All right. So what date was your first involvement in this case?
I believe it was in November of 1999.
Does November 22nd, 1999 ring a bell?
It does.
Okay. And on that date, did you get a call or were you contacted by an individual named Timothy Martin?
I was.
Tell the jury who Timothy Martin was.
Timothy Martin was an individual who I arrested for committing several acts of public lewdness. I don't know what the statute here in California is, but in New York, public lewdness is when you expose yourself in a sexual manner and in the witness of another person.
Okay. That's somebody you had investigated?
I had, and I arrested him.
All right. And did he end up being convicted and incarcerated?
I believe he pled guilty after grand jury.
Okay. And was this prior to November 22nd, 1999?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So what was the nature of this call on November 22nd, 1999?
Basically, Mr. Martin called me and asked if I could meet with him and his attorney, that he was being sentenced soon, and he had some information he wanted to share with me regarding an old murder that happened in South Salem.
And he wanted some kind of a deal, I'm taking it?
He was asking if I could speak to the judge on his behalf.
All right. Did you eventually meet with him?
I did.
And did you eventually get information from him?
I did.
And did he have some association? Strike that. Did you check out the information he had provided to some extent?
I did.
And did it turn out to be accurate information?
It wasn't accurate, but the information he provided definitely piqued my interest on this particular case.
Okay. And what case was he talking about?
When I met with him, he stated that there was a murder that occurred in South Salem in 1982, and that an individual named Robert Durst killed his wife, Kathy Durst.
Okay. So he told you about the general case. He gave you some specific information. You ran down that information. It did not turn out to be fruitful, correct?
That is correct.
However, you're saying that this piqued your interest in the case.
It did.
Had you ever heard about this case prior to getting that call from Timothy Martin?
No, I was in high school when it happened.
Okay. Real high school or undercover?
Real high school.
Okay. So did you continue with this case, looking into it?
I did. I approached the supervisor and asked if we had any information or if he remembered the case, and he stated he did. He was a trooper at the time. He pulled out a file which was very thin, very little information in it, and after going through it, I realized that the whole investigation basically centered in New York City, and it was turned over to New York City Police.
All right. So you're saying that the file that the state police had on this particular case didn't have a lot of stuff in it. It was not much of an investigation, and that you learned that the bulk of the investigation had been turned over to the New York Police Department, is that right?
That is correct.
And that would be the 20th precinct?
Yes, sir.
I have a photograph. May I mark this as the next in order? Madam Clerk, what is the next number? 245?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to put this on projector. You recognize that?
Yes.
Is that a map depicting portions of the New York area?
Yes, it is.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the New York area?
Yes, it is.
Now, the top where, right here where this red balloon is that fairly and accurately depict where the South Salem area is located?
That is correct.
And the bottom portion of this line, which connects that red balloon and where my pen is right now, is that generally on Manhattan?
That is correct.
And is that generally where the 20th precinct of the New York Police Department is located?
Yes, it is.
And when I pulled this up and printed it on, I don't remember, I think maybe MapQuest, it said that that distance was 49.1 miles and would take about an hour and 27 minutes to drive. Is that the approximate distance between South Salem and the 20th precinct, about approximately 50 miles?
That's the approximate mileage. As far as time, it all depends on New York City traffic.
So the hour and a half that's on this exhibit, is that in average traffic, light traffic, heavy traffic?
I've driven down that way from there, probably average.
Average. So on your best drive, without any traffic whatsoever, how long does it take, given the types of roads you're driving? And
I mean, you could probably make it down hour, 15, 20 minutes maybe, but that's pretty accurate.
okay, it's a fair statement that the 20th precinct is fairly far from South Salem.
It is.
Okay. So when you started this investigation in 1999, did it start really in earnest in November of 1999?
Pretty much so.
Okay. What types of things did you do as the investigation began?
As I said, I went through the state police file, which did not have a whole lot of information, but it got me started with certain people's names and phone numbers, and I started contacting them. And then I was able to get a copy of the New York City missing person report and followed through with that.
All right. And did this investigation continue through the end of 1999?
It did.
Did it continue into 2000?
It did.
Did it continue through 2000?
Yes, it did.
And did you interview civilian witnesses?
I did.
How many would you approximate during this period of time, 99, the end of 99 through 2000? How many civilians approximately do you think you interviewed?
At least 24, maybe more.
Okay. Did you interview police officers who had been involved in the original investigation?
I did.
Did you speak with Trooper Harney?
I did.
Did you speak with Detective Struck from the New York Police Department?
I did.
Did you speak to probably many other law enforcement officers?
I did.
Did you speak to members of the McCormack family?
I did.
This investigation that was going on in 1999 and 2000, was this a public investigation or a private investigation?
I was doing everything possible to keep it quiet.
Why is that?
I didn't want Mr. Durst to know that the case had been reopened.
And was it getting any media attention prior to these news articles that we're going to talk about on November 11th of 2000? Prior to that, did it get any news attention?
None whatsoever.
The witnesses you spoke with, did you pick certain types of people to speak with prior to it going public?
I did. I wanted to speak to those people close to Kathy, and I was able to get their names through Kathy's family and her friends because I knew it wouldn't get out when I spoke to them.
Were you speaking to Durst family members prior to it going public?
No,
Why not?
because that would most likely tip off Robert about the open investigation.
Were you speaking to people who you knew were associated with Mr. Durst closely prior to it going public?
No.
For the same reason?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And other than speaking to civilian witnesses and law enforcement officers, did you meet with prosecutors who were involved in the original investigation?
Yes.
Okay. Who was the district attorney of Westchester County at the time that you began and conducted your investigation?
In 1999,
Yes.
Janine Pirro.
Okay. And did you report to her directly?
No.
Who did you report to directly?
One of her assistants named, I think, Susan Costabile.
Okay. How active was Miss Pirro in the initial portion of this investigation?
Not really involved. The reason we decided to get the district attorney's office involved in the initial investigation was we figured maybe down the road we might need to get subpoenas and so forth or warrants, so we brought them on board a little while in.
Was Janine Pirro the district attorney in the 1980s when this crime occurred?
No, Carl Vergari was.
Okay. Assume there's been testimony in this case by a friend of Mr. Durst that, let me make sure I get this right. That Bob Durst had told him that after Kathy disappeared in 1982, that Janine Pirro was after him, and she was going to go after him again in the reinvestigation. Would that be possible?
No.
Why not?
I believe she was an assistant DA at the time, but she wasn't the DA. I don't think she was handling anything that would have occurred up in northern Westchester. And when I brought this case to her, she told me she never heard of Durst before.
Okay. Did you have a DA, an investigator from the district attorney's office in Westchester County assigned to work with you on the case?
There were several, but the main guy that I was partnered with was John O'Donnell.
Okay. As part of your investigation over this period of time, did you conduct any forensic investigation?
Yes, I did.
Did you conduct forensic investigations at the South Salem house?
Yes, we did.
What types of things did you do?
We did a search of the interior of the house. We searched the lake. We searched under the house in the shed. And we did remove some property from in the house and had it tested.
Okay. And did you, when you began this forensic testing, did you expect, like that, how many owners had been in that house since Mr. Durst lived there by the time you got involved in the case and did your forensic investigation?
I believe there were 2 or 3.
Okay. Did you expect to find anything?
Kind of a needle in the haystack type of thing, but you have to do the investigation and hope for the best.
Okay. Did you get any forensic evidence that indicated a crime had been committed inside that home?
No.
Did that surprise you?
No.
Why not?
Because of the period of time.
Okay. You said you searched the lake. Is this Lake Truesdale?
Yes, it is.
And did you do these searches in March and April of 2000?
Yes.
What type of searches were they?
We had our dive team go into the lake, and we did what they call grid searches of the entire lake.
What is that?
Grid searches are the divers go in and they do in certain quadrants, basically portions of the lake, so every part of the lake is covered.
Okay. And nothing turned up, right?
No.
Is that correct?
Yes.
In assuming that a murder occurred in January, is that lake frozen over at that time?
Usually that time of the year, the lake is only, I believe, 10 feet deep at its deepest, and that lake usually freezes over.
How did you have divers out there on the lake? Didn't the neighbors get curious? How did you keep this private?
Well, the few that did call, I told them that it was a training exercise.
Okay. That South Salem home, you've been inside of it?
Yes, sir.
This is the one that Mr. Durst used to live in
Yes, sir.
on Hoyt Street,
Yes, sir.
62 Hoyt Street?
Yes.
Okay. Did you, is there a staircase in that home?
I believe there was one going down from the main floor.
Okay. And where did this staircase lead?
Went to like a kind of a weird-looking basement area.
And is this a basement you could stand in?
Yes.
What was the size of this basement approximately?
I'd have to say maybe 20 by 20, if that.
20 feet by 20 feet, if that?
Yes.
Okay. And did this have a window that went out to the exterior of the residence low on the home?
Yes, there was a window that faced, if you're looking at the front of the house, it was to the left.
Okay. And then leading from that basement, was there also a crawl space area?
Yes, there was.
At some point, did you receive what has been commonly referred to in this case as the dig note from the McCormack family?
Yes.
And did you have that forensically examined for handwriting to compare to someone?
Yes.
Who were you comparing it to?
I believe it was sent to the state police lab in Albany.
No, but whose handwriting were you comparing it to?
Oh, to Mr. Durst, I'm sorry.
Okay. At some point, strike that. At some point, did this investigation become known to the public?
Yes, it did.
And was this on November 11th of the year 2000?
Yes.
What happened on that day?
Apparently, the New York Daily News and I believe the New York Times, and maybe the New York Post, all broke with stories of it.
Did that surprise you?
Disappointed me.
Why?
It's trying to keep the case quiet.
Okay. And after that point in time, how public did this trial become, this investigation become?
It was crazy at that point. All various different media outlets were contacting our trooper barracks, wanting information, and so much for keeping it quiet at that point.
At the time that you began this investigation, had you ever heard, in 1999, had you ever heard the name Susan Berman before?
Prior to the opening of the investigation?
Yes.
No.
At some point during your investigation, did you hear her name?
Yes, I did.
In what context?
Mostly friends of Kathy's who said that she was very close with Bob Durst and that she should be someone that we definitely interview because they were extremely close at the time of Kathy's disappearance.
Did you plan on interviewing Susan Berman?
I did.
Was it more than one person who brought up the name of Susan Berman as someone you should definitely talk to?
I think it was a number of Kathy's friends and her family who brought up Susan's name.
When were you planning on speaking to Susan Berman?
Probably at some point going into the new year. There wasn't a definitive date set at that point.
Okay. And had you ever reached out to Susan Berman to let her know you wanted to speak with her?
No, I did not.
Were you the lead investigator on the case?
I was.
Were you the one in charge of determining who was and wasn't going to be spoken to?
Yes.
If someone were going to speak to Susan Berman, would you know about it?
I would hope so.
Okay. And, well, is there anyone else who would have potentially interviewed witnesses without talking to you?
No, and I had Susan Berman's contact information and all that.
Okay, you had actually obtained her contact information?
Yes.
And had you shared it with anybody yet?
No.
Okay. Had you ever, I asked you, you said you never spoke with her, right?
I did not speak to her.
To this date, have you ever spoken to Susan Berman?
No.
Did you speak to anyone in California, any law enforcement officers in California about wanting to speak to Susan Berman?
No, I did not.
You were aware of it at a point in time where she became killed, right?
I'm sorry?
You were aware of a point in time when she was murdered, right?
Yes, I was.
Prior to that date, had you ever spoken to any law enforcement officer in California about speaking to Susan Berman?
No, I did not.
When did you learn about Susan Berman's murder?
I believe it was a few days after she passed.
Okay. And prior to her murder, had you reached out to her either directly or indirectly at all?
No, I did not.
Was there a point in time where District Attorney Janine Piros became more active in the case or her interest in the case peaked?
Yes, after Susan Berman's death.
Okay. And tell us about that.
Well, after I found out about Susan Berman's death, I notified my superiors, and we had a kind of a rush meeting at the DA's office. And basically, I told them this was one of our main witnesses that I wanted to interview down the road, and she was murdered.
Okay. And did she at some point become more actively involved herself in the case?
Yes.
How so?
She was basically handling all the press that was associated with it, like when the various networks wanted to do interviews on it, she would do the press conference or the interview. And then when Morris Black was murdered down in Galveston, she insisted on coming along with the investigators.
And did she hold a press conference down there?
Yes, she did.
Did you want to do that?
No.
Did Ms. Pirro seem interested in the news publicity aspects of the case?
I believe so.
Okay. At some point, were you transferred off the case?
Yes, sir.
When was that in relation to all of this?
Around that time.
Okay. Had you expressed disagreements with her in some form or another of certain aspects
Yes.
of the case and how she was handling it?
Yes.
Okay. And how far away did you get transferred?
About 30 miles from home,
Okay.
or from my other station.
Did you eventually get transferred back to Somers?
Yes, I did.
When was that?
When the new DA came in.
Okay. After Jeannie Pirro left?
Yes.
All right. So when you got transferred out, what year was that approximately?
I'm not sure. I think maybe 2002.
And at that point, you were no longer on the case?
I was not.
You were told to cease investigation?
I was assigned to a different trooper barracks, so I was handling different crimes at that point.
Okay. And was there a new district attorney investigator assigned as well?
Yes.
Okay. Who ended up working on the case?
Senior investigator Ed Murphy from the DA's office, and then there was, I believe, investigator Ed Lloyd from the state police.
Okay. I think Ed Murphy, he's somebody you wanted on early working with you, wasn't he?
Yes, I did.
Why is that?
He was a seasoned New York City homicide detective prior to retiring and going to the DA's office, and I thought he would have been a good fit.
As part of your investigation in this case while you were still on it, did you speak with an individual named Douglas Oliver?
Yes, I did.
And who was Mr. Oliver?
He was a good friend of Robert Durst.
Did you interview him on December 19th, 2001?
I believe that's right.
And what do you remember about just his demeanor during that interview?
He wasn't very pleasant. It's hard to describe. He just, he wasn't a very pleasant individual, wasn't very happy about us being there.
Well,
I was there with investigator Dominic Cimento from the state police. We did the interview together.
having watched him testify in this case, I just have to ask you, did he answer any of your questions?
I'm sorry?
Did he answer any of your questions you posed?
Such as,
Never mind.
okay.
Did you speak to him about Kathleen Durst and what he thought happened to Kathleen Durst?
Yes.
And back in 2001, did you have any kind of ongoing theory that Kathleen Durst had been the victim of white slavery?
I'd never heard that before.
Well, if Mr. Oliver testified that you brought that subject up to him and that you were the one who suggested that perhaps she was sold into white slavery, or you're the one who mentioned it, what would you say about that?
That is an incorrect statement.
Yes? Mr. Oliver's statement is right here,
All right, just a moment.
Overruled, it's not for the truth of the statement.
It's also asking one witness to comment on the testimony of another.
That's true. Let's see, but,
Your Honor, evidence code section 1235 is prior inconsistent
yeah,
statement.
got it. Yeah, overruled.
So I didn't hear your response. What would be your response to that?
That I never heard, that what Mr. Oliver said, that I said was not untrue.
Let me ask you this. Did you bring up white slavery at all?
I did not.
Did you ever mention anything even related to white slavery?
I did not, neither did my partner.
Okay. And so what was it Mr. Oliver told you about that?
Just basically looking at different theories, and he thought that maybe she was sold into white slavery because of her cocaine use.
Was she? Okay. Did Mr. Oliver tell you that Robert Durst at that time had a girlfriend named Holly?
Yes.
Did Mr. Oliver tell you at the time that the defendant also was dating someone named Prudence Farrell?
Yes.
Are you certain that he told you these things?
Yes.
Are you familiar with CODIS?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jury what CODIS is?
CODIS is like a data bank. Usually back in the day when you'd have a fingerprint sample you'd put into a certain data bank, and if it matched from a crime or a person, you'd get a hit on it. CODIS is what we use for DNA in the same similar fashion.
So when a body is found,
Oh, I'm sorry.
when a body is found in the New York area and is unidentified, nobody claims the body. Does that body eventually go to a medical examiner's office?
That is correct.
And if the body is eventually never identified, is a sample of the DNA of that body taken and uploaded to the system?
That is correct.
Okay. And as a law enforcement officer, are you capable of getting DNA samples from family members of a missing person and uploading that DNA to see if there's a hit, a match?
Yes.
Okay. Did you obtain samples from Kathleen McCormack's any relative?
Her mother.
Okay. And did you upload that DNA sample into the missing person?
We sent it down to the, I believe, the University of Texas. They specialize in familial DNA, which is when you get DNA from a family member for comparison.
Okay. And were there any hits?
It was successful. It was put into CODIS, but there's been no hits thus far.
Okay. I have a photograph, may I mark this as People's 246?
Yeah.
I'm showing you what's been marked as People's 246. Do you recognize that building?
That's the 86th Street residence of Bob and Kathy Durst.
Okay, that's the 12 East 86th Street.
Yes, sir.
I have another photograph. May I mark this as People's 247?
Yeah.
Showing you what's been marked as 247. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
That's the other address.
37 Riverside Drive?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I have another photograph. Let me mark this as People's 248. Showing you what has been marked as People's 248. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
That's the Katona train station up in Bedford.
Okay. Do you know what year or when Gilberta died?
It was not too long ago, probably in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe.
Okay. Well, it's July 26, 2015.
15, okay, longer, yes, but I know she did pass away.
Okay. Well, let's put it this way. Did she pass away prior to the arraignment in this particular case?
I'm sorry, prior to?
Okay. She passed away in 2015?
Yes.
Okay. Would the court take judicial notice that the defendant was arraigned in this case on November 8th of 2016?
Yes.
Oh. Counsel indicates they'll stipulate that Gilberta died on July 26, 2015. They'll stipulated?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And would the court take judicial notice that under California law, conditional examination is not possible prior to an arraignment?
All right. That's true.
If I have a photograph. May I mark this as People's 249?
Yeah.
You recognize that store?
Yes.
What is that?
Caldor's department store.
Okay. And is that the Caldors in Ridgefield, Connecticut?
I mean, they all look pretty much the same, but I've been to the one in Ridgefield, and it looks like it.
Okay. I have a stipulation. It's stipulation 20, Your Honor. May I mark this as People's 250?
Yes.
Original stipulations 20. Counsel, will you stipulate that defendant Robert Durst used his chemical bank Visa card to make a purchase at the Caldor store located in Ridgefield, Connecticut on February 1st, 1982? No, we don't stipulate yet. I don't think.
Did you ask us to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Court accepts stipulation. We already have.
What type of store is Caldor's?
Basically sold everything, I think, except food.
You
Clothing. I'm sorry?
Can you buy cleaning supplies there?
Yes, sir.
Can you buy, is there a hardware aspect to it?
Yes.
Can you buy tools there?
Yes.
You buy drop cloths there?
Yes.
Buy trash bags?
Yes.
Tarps?
I'm sorry?
Tarps?
Yes.
Okay. How far is the Caldor store in Ridgefield, Connecticut from South Salem?
Probably 20-minute ride.
Okay. Is it the closest kind of large all-purpose store to South Salem?
I believe in Cross River there's a hardware store, but it's a smaller one.
Okay. Are you familiar with the area known as the Pine Barrens?
Yes.
And I have a map. May I mark this as equals 251?
Yeah.
Does this map fairly and accurately depict where the Pine Barrens is located, where it says Beach Haven, New Jersey, in relation to South Salem?
Yes, it does.
How long is that drive down there?
About 2.5 hours.
And what is the Pine Barrens like, that area?
Pine Barrens is this vast area, hundreds of thousands of acres of pine trees and sand.
Pine trees and sand, you said?
Yes, sir.
Have you been down there?
Yes, sir.
And did you take some photographs?
Yes, sir.
Describe, well, first of all, are you familiar with the areas where two locations where phone calls were made in this particular case?
I am.
Okay. And
Objection, Your Honor, to the idea that they were made with respect to this case.
No, there's evidence in this case of phone calls.
yeah, I said it wrong. Right. You're familiar with the calls I'm talking about from Barnegat and Beach Haven down there?
Yes.
There's two phones that were used.
Yes.
Okay. Forget about the substance of the calls or if they're how they do or don't relate to this case. You're familiar with the locations of where those calls were made from, right?
I am.
One of them was made from a payphone outside of a laundromat?
Yes.
Okay. And have you been down there to those locations where these calls were made?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jury where, in relation to this pine forested wilderness area, these calls came from? How far?
Well, one location was a motor lodge or motor inn, which is now a condo complex. And that's probably about 7-minute drive from what was once the laundromat where other calls were made. The laundromat now is a gun store. From there, from those two locations, the drive to the Pine Barrens is about a 15-minute drive.
Okay.
10 to 15 minutes. It wasn't long.
When you get to the Pine Barrens, what type of roads are we talking about?
I mean, just off one of the main roads, we counted probably well over a dozen dirt roads right off of it that just basically go to nowhere.
And how isolated is this area?
Very isolated.
If someone wanted to go somewhere and not be seen, how easy would it be to put yourself in that position in this area if you have a car?
Just turn in any of those dirt roads.
I have a two photographs from the marquees as People's 252 and 253.
Yep.
I'm showing you what's been marked as 252. Did you take that picture?
Yes.
Does this fairly and accurately represent what the roads look like going through the Pine Barrens?
That was actually one of the more developed roads that you can
Oh.
turn in from there.
So if you go down this road in 252, you're saying there's less developed roads you could turn off of?
Off of the main road, yes, that was actually one of the more developed roads off of the main highway.
Showing you People's 253. Is this another view showing kind of what these roads
That's
look
another
like?
road, yes. And in a short period of time, we passed well over a dozen.
Of roads like this?
Yes, sir.
And if you walk off this road to the right, what would you be walking into?
You just keep going and you're walking into pine trees and sand, in some areas dirt.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Can I visit with the court at sidebar? And I probably need...
Do you need the people or just
The people?
Yes.
And the
Yes.
court, and the court reporter, Your Honor.
Well, let's see. All right. Why don't we go into this room? Go into the jury room.
Thank you, Your Honor.
It will be your jury room. Not yet. Ladies and gentlemen, this argument is too good to rush. I want to savor it. No reason you should stick around during that. So I'll let you go to lunch early, and we'll come back at 1:30. So do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you at 1:30. Room?
I have one thing to add.
Yes. And we're now back in the courtroom. Mr. Durst is obviously present to this,
Thank you, Your Honor.
but our jurors are gone. Yes.
One of the reasons that I would also like to inquire into the Dr. Cooperman matter with the detective is because the detective has said he didn't speak to Ms. Berman. And based on his interviews with Mr. Jarecki and Jinx, he believed Dr. Cooperman and that Susan was not involved in calling the school. And so, with that said, Your Honor, that's another reason why he might not have spoken to Susan, as opposed to his position that the reason he didn't speak to Susan was to avoid publicity. So I think that the fact that he's engaged in an investigation where he has to review all the work that's been done, including the original searches at South Salem, even though the people will argue that they were cursory, the fact that they brought up that they did the lake, that they went into the woodwork, I think I'm entitled to inquire about all the steps he took to investigate, to put everything in context, Your Honor.
So it seems that the hot button is hearsay statements of witnesses who are not available, and those statements are not reliable. That's one area that I'm concerned about. Here, the reason that evidence was supposedly relevant was because of the state of mind of the detective. The state of the mind of this detective or any detective doesn't matter. What matters is the evidence that they gather. That being said, the people have described the efforts of this detective, and it has a couple of purposes. One is obviously the idea that Mr. Durst became aware of this investigation, which is the people's theory of the special circumstance, but also There certainly is what Mr. Chesnoff described, which is this contrasting of a poor investigation with a more elaborate investigation later on. Now, that itself is not relevant for either side, but having been presented, why should it not be rebutted?
One last additional
Yes,
thing.
yes.
The detective thought that Eddie Lopez was trustworthy. That's another point that I would bring out. He specifically says that he interviewed Lopez, he believed that he was trying to be truthful, and he described seeing Kathy that evening. So, and all the other, I mean, he has investigated everything that we've tried to get in, and I won't say anymore. I'll talk myself in.
Let me go through this one at a time. First of all, the detective had no involvement in the original investigation. Zero. He is not allowed. So imagine the situation, Your Honor, where I had a detective get up and give his opinion about credibility of witnesses. You can't do it. So the idea, I'll take him reverse, the idea that he can comment about whether he believed Eddie Lopez or not is absolutely irrelevant. It's the same reason why I can't get up there and ask him, hey, did you believe so-and-so when they told you X? Number two, what Mr. Chesnoff wants to do is, in essence, even though it's not only outside the scope of direct, it's outside the scope of this witness's knowledge, you don't get to go back and say, okay, detective, I know you weren't involved in the original NYPD investigation, but I want you to comment on what you think about it. I want you to comment on, do you think it was well done? I want you to comment on, do you believe that the detective did a good job? We would never be able to do that. It's irrelevant for the same reason the court said. What the defense is allowed to do is they're allowed to ask the detective any information about his current investigation that does not involve evidence that the court has already said is inadmissible. This is, again, probably, and I know the court seems to have taken care of it by saying that the court has already found the Eddie Lopez information to not be reliable, to not be trustworthy. The defense had a chance for many years to stipulate, which they chose for a tactical reason not to take advantage of. Then they changed their minds after being told for 3 years that we would agree to the unavailable witness with Mr. Lopez and that all of his statements would come in. They made a choice, and later on they decided to change it. So anything relating to him commenting about what he thinks about a witness, there's no evidentiary basis for it. Now,
But
what he is allowed,
that's not the entirety of what Mr. Chesnoff has described, though. I agree. I mean, your points are well taken, but that's only part of what Mr. Chesnoff is talking about.
well, let me continue, and maybe the best way for me to address it is, can the court indicate what part of Mr. Chesnoff's offer of proof is the court entertaining right now, and then I'll respond to that.
All right, so first of all, the fact that he believed Eddie Lopez is not admissible. It doesn't. His opinion doesn't matter. I mean, we're inferring from the file being thin that means that it wasn't an elaborate investigation. That's
the New York State Police file, not the
Right.
right. Exactly. So that's, he hasn't actually offered an opinion on the quality of the investigation itself.
Your Honor, how could he how would he be allowed to?
Now,
I'm sorry, I think you're disagreeing with me agreeing with you, which is confusing to me.
No.
Yes, okay.
No,
All right.
In response to that,
Yes, Mr.
Your
Chesnoff.
Honor, short file because New York did everything. So that explains why it was small in their office until Becerra gets involved, and I should be able to go into the fact that they interviewed scores of witnesses in New York. They spent lots of time investigating Kathy's disappearance.
And that's to prove that the file was
It's to
not...
prove that the investigation that they've been critical of was actually a real investigation.
Okay, so that's not relevant. So...
Well, how is it relevant for them to present that it's not? It was a bad investigation. Mr.
Well,
Lewin
wait a
said,
second.
Mr. Lewin attacked Mr. Struck in his conditional like no tomorrow.
All right, but I didn't hear the objection that this was irrelevant. So
And I really,
Is this another, I thought before there was a bootstrap where we're letting material in or stipulating a testimony you didn't think was relevant because you thought that would let you then introduce evidence to contradict it.
I don't think I had that in mind, Your Honor.
Your Honor, so the court was going to let me know what of Mr. Chesnow's offer proves the court entertaining.
So let me
Respond to that.
there are a few points. So he interviewed Detective Cooperman.
No, Dr. Cooperman.
Detective interviewed Dr. Cooperman. I misspoke.
And Detective Struck.
So
And-
his interview of Detective Struck, let's do one thing at a time. So he does talk to Cooperman.
And he said, Dean Cooperman was honest and confident in his opinion.
No,
So,
Well, but, Your Honor, he's claiming that he didn't talk to Susan Berman for one reason. And I'm going to want to argue to the jury that he didn't speak to Susan Berman because he believed Dr. Cooperman, and therefore Susan Berman didn't call Einstein, as the government claims is the case here, to cover up for Mr. Durst.
so that's the reason he did or did not talk to Susan Berman isn't.
Why'd they bring it out?
What's
Well, no.
relevant is the fact
The
that
point was, I'm sorry. The point was that he did not ever talk to Susan Berman.
But
Why was not really part of it.
He said why, Your Honor. He said he didn't want Mr. Durst to find out. That's why he kept it. But I'm going to argue to him that the reason he didn't do it is because he knew that Susan Berman hadn't called the school. They elicited this, Your Honor. That's what they did. They asked him, why didn't you talk to Susan Berman? And he said, because I was afraid if I talked to Susan Berman, it would get back to Mr. Durst. And I want to be able to impeach him by saying, you spoke to Cooperman, you believe Cooperman, therefore Susan was not a witness, therefore Susan did not call the school, and therefore you didn't call her.
All right, it's 12 o'clock. We'll come back and continue this argument at 1:30.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
In recess.
Could I briefly do something for your clerk? I marked 3 DVDs. I did not mark transcripts. Could I mark people's 242, 243, 244A as the corresponding transcripts?
Thank you.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.